Dr. Greer, it's so good to see you. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Good to see you too.
I know I'm fired up, and everyone at Gaia is fired up for your event coming up in November 8th and 9th. We are so excited to have you back on campus.
Great. Yeah, no, it'd be great to be there. It's always a wonderful crowd and very supportive venue for what we're doing, not only on disclosure, but on the science of consciousness and the whole spectrum of the cosmology. Yeah, and we're going to do a deep dive into that part of it as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to jump into some really hot topic questions right now in the world of disclosure. But before we do that, people listening, today is the last day of the early bird special for the event. So if you really want to go, click on the link in the description below, okay? So let's jump right in, Dr. Greer. I'm excited for this.
Sure.
So probably the biggest question, the most exciting thing happening in the space right now that everyone's talking about is 3I Atlas. I'm hearing from Avi Loeb that it could be potentially something extraordinary. I'm hearing from NASA that no, it's just a comet. And am I hearing from all sorts of different types of people on the internet that it could be something like an alien mothership or some sort of extraterrestrial race? We need clarity, Dr. Greer. Can you please provide some clarity on what you think 3I Atlas is or what you're hearing?
Well, first of all, it'd be unlikely to be a comet. It'd be more likely to be a rogue asteroid rock. Comets are more gaseous. And anyway, so as far as it being anything under intelligent control, I haven't seen any data to suggest that. Now, if it does have artificial components to it, which I haven't seen, then there's also other possibilities. For example, there have been civilizations in our solar system and outside our solar system for millions of years. This could be the equivalent of some space junk from a long time ago that's drifted in. There are a lot of possibilities that I can think of. Of course, the internet, the hysteria, and Avi Loeb jump immediately to some of the more sensational ones, although he's backtracked on that, saying that he was saying theoretically it could be this, which is a sort of a psyop. So my understanding of the cell that Avi Loeb is part of, the UFO connected cell group that he's connected to is a very prominent disinformation gaslighting operation. So I'm pretty sure that anything from those quarters I would look at very skeptically, particularly when it begins to track towards a threat from outer space. Remember, This is what Wernher von Braun on his deathbed told my dear friend Carol Rosen, who was his right-hand assistant in 1974, that over a period of decades, they would roll out this alien threat to sort of unite the world around sort of a totalitarian, militaristic dystopia that would be looking at anything from space as a threat that we should fight, which would then build military and intelligence spending. And that whole scheme was concocted in about 1953, 54. And we have documents in our archive to prove it. If you go to dpiarchive.com, it's the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. There's terabytes of data in there. We put everything in, except sensitive stuff that had names and sources that we can't disclose. And it clearly goes through what that whole objective has been, all the way tracking for the last 70 years, since the early to mid 50s. So I think that I would look at it I look at these things very skeptically, particularly when it becomes an internet zeitgeist of hysteria and we're being invaded. And this is what the drone stuff, right? And you remember last year at this time and all the drone stuff, and it was a psyop. All of those were man-made. We know who were doing it. I know the head of a team that was doing reconnaissance of them out of Lockheed Skunk Works. And it was to see how the media and the public would react and how much hysteria in the White House and in Congress they could create. Look, this is the oldest game in the intelligence playbook. And of course, the problem with, let's just say, retail ufology and pop culture is that there's not any depth of intelligence analysis. And as you know, I've been briefing people like the director of the CIA since 1993. So I come to this from a very, I don't know if you say skeptical, wary. I'm very wary of things that have that spin on it, because I know that that's been the long-term agenda. So this Atlas, comet, asteroid, whatever it is, I can't disprove, you can't prove a negative. I can't disprove that it's not of artificial manufacture. But even if it was to be one, remember, any interplanetary civilization is not going to be drifting along at that speed. It isn't going to happen. They're going to be moving in hyperspace. They're going to be going like teleportation, be going from point A to B like this, right? Quantum entanglement, but on a macro scale with a whole spacecraft. I'm going to describe for Gaia when I'm there, how these technologies work and how they're related to quantum entanglement, but also the conscious field and consciousness. There's a whole nexus where all this comes together. And the term I use is transdimensional interstellar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're interstellar, but they're transiting different dimensions. And we're going to do a deep unpacking of that for everyone at Gaia in November. So my intention is to get clarity on the cosmology and then understand it. But if you understand the physics, I know, my uncle was Northrop Grumman his whole life, and he worked on the lunar module team that put the first man on the moon. And, when you're not talking about things drifting along at 100,000 miles per hour or 50,000 miles per hour. You're talking about things that are beyond the speed of light, what we call superluminal travel. So any legitimate interstellar craft has that capability, because otherwise to go from point A to B, even from our closest, star system, would take thousands or millions of years at something less than the speed of light. Now, when you're talking about this object drifting along at a few tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, that sounds fast, but from an interstellar, the distances, everyone should remember 1 light year is the distance that a light goes at 186,000 miles every second for a whole year. So every second of a year, that's the distance. That's what a light year is. It's not a measure. It's a measurement of distance, not time. So a light year is that amount of distance. So even our closest stellar neighbors would be, at that speed, it'd be ludicrous that they could ever get here. So this is the whole problem. And anyone who's an astrophysicist or someone at Harvard who doesn't know that, I'd be very worried about their intellectual acumen.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarity. I feel the same way you do, but I can't put it in the words you just put it. Thank you.
Okay.
That's what I needed. I need to give that to all my friends and be like, this is exactly what I think is going on. But a follow-up question to that is, when you talk about the threat-based narrative, has specifically the idea of an alien mothership coming to get us been talked about in these programs before?
Well, they create that. So in other words, let's unwind this a little bit so that we get some sort of foundation for everyone listening.
Please.
We have people on our team who have been able to confirm from being in classified projects, as well as in the CIA and NSA vaults where the secret documents are kept, that we mastered gravity control and propulsion in October of 1954. So I was born in June of 1955. I'm 70. So that's 71 years ago, right? So when you look at this, 71 years ago, we mastered gravity control. Before that, we had gravity propulsion systems, but they weren't stable. This is why you see in the early 50s and late 40s, some old home movies of man-made UFOs that flutter like a leaf. Those were our experimental ones, not the extraterrestrial.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So,
okay.
Yes. So, I hate to say it. I mean, it's the science of this does matter, even though we live in a very anti-science time, and there's very little valid science going on in ufology, as you know. So the problem becomes if they have had, these covert programs have had that capability since October of 54 to have stable electrogravitic gravity control craft, and they have. That means that by now, 71 years later, there are some extraordinary things that are being seen that everyone says, oh, it's got to be alien, it's extraterrestrial. No, it's not. It's from the Lockheed Skunk Works, it's Northrop Grumman, some of the very sophisticated ones that are partially living bio-nano machines or Raytheon. We know where they are. We know how they've been used in clandestine operations. This is being looked at by some very senior people in the U.S. government now as criminal activity, because I have said since the 90s that this is the world's largest RICO, racketeering influence corrupt organization running this. And the RICO law was passed in 1970 to take apart the mafia. So now it's got to be used to take apart this cabal of folks doing these things. But their plan was always to use the man-made platforms to deceive the public. Let's give a great example. Many of the triangular craft that you see, there are ones that are extraterrestrial. But what they did was reverse engineer that, and now there's a whole fleet of various sized man-made triangles that are from mainly Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. So this is how easy it is to deceive the public, but by extension, members of Congress, the president, whoever it is. So, what does it say? Knowledge is power. And the Vedas, Sanskrit says knowledge is the greatest purifier. So the knowledge of this is important, and the science of it's important, and this trajectory of technological evolution from the 40s and 50s to now is important. And without that information, it's sort of a very superficial. I saw this object. Well, yeah, but where did it come from? Was it actually an interstellar object? Was it something non-human? Or is it actually one of our covert programs setting up a sort of a psychological warfare operation, a psyop? And no one's asking these hard questions properly. And that's what we're trying to bring to light, because I can tell you at this point, knowing what I know that's going on behind the scenes, this whole area of secrecy is going to get disclosed. But if it gets disclosed deceptively, it'll lead straight to a catastrophe. So what we're trying to do is be sure it's being disclosed truthfully. And that's a very lonely space to be in, frankly. I'll speak personally, because most people either don't have that information, or they're operatives that are deliberately deceiving members of the U.S. government and the media and the public. So this gets into a big, complicated problem here, where what I'm trying to do is assemble the whistleblowers who have that information on not only what's been done with extraterrestrial vehicles, but what we're doing with the man-made tech, high-tech, exotic technology that had been used to stage mutilations, abductions, big events, the whole drone scare. And now there's this thing coming in from space, this Atlas comet, whatever they're calling it. I don't think it's a comet, maybe. I think it's more likely to be a rogue asteroid. But whatever it is, the spin that's being put on it, the hysteria on the internet and the media is very much looks to me like a psychological warfare operation.
Well, I agree with you. And speaking of whistleblowers, we just had a big, I would say, historic UAP hearing, the third one in 3 years. It seems significant to me. It seemed more that not necessarily the whistleblowers were bigger or more important or more interesting than years past, but the way Congress was kind of treating it and how they were talking about it. Speaking of your whistleblowers in the UAP hearing, like, what are you hearing? What's going to come next? What did you glean from the hearing, and what is your team working on now?
Well, none of the hearings have had anything substantive yet. Now, none of them. I mean, if you go back to 2000, I would ask your viewers to go back to 2001, look in our archive at the National Press Club event. We had 22 whistleblowers, any one of which were extremely 10 times more consequential than anyone that's been appearing at these hearings. And that's by design. The people who have intercepted the leadership of that committee, Luna, for example, who I briefed years ago, they have been intercepted by folks who are feeding them they're not even whistleblowers, they're minor witnesses, and they're minor people who really, many of them, like Mike Gold, who I know, doesn't know anything about the subject and admits he doesn't. Meanwhile, I turned over a list of about 50 very high value targets who need to be subpoenaed that they won't call. So there's something very odd going on here. And I've been in private meetings up on Capitol Hill in the Senate and the House, and I have brought in many of these high value whistleblowers who have actually worked on the craft or been involved in operations involving both ET and man-made craft, and who are direct firsthand, not secondhand, firsthand witnesses. And curiously, they're not calling any of them. They're not even asking them to appear. They have been blocked. So the real whistleblowers and the real hearings are being blocked by people who have deliberately misinformed and disinformed, actually, people like Miss Luna and others. Now, I'm working with other members of the Senate and House who are not being so easily deceived. But the dog and pony show that you're calling these hearings, it's sound and fury signifying nothing, to quote Shakespeare. But now, the night before that hearing, I was at a private gathering with some of them and a few of the members to Congress and got to speak to them. And so there's two tracks going on. There's the thing you're seeing in the public, and there's what's really going on that's significant behind the scenes. And to the extent I can talk about that at GaiaSphere, I'm going to go into a deep dive into that, because I think the public curious about this need to know how this is operating and what's actually going on. That's going to become, that is very consequential. And I can't talk too specifically, but I can tell you that it's at a very high level here and abroad, and it's very serious, and there's enormous progress. My 35, I started this project in 1990, so that was 35 years ago. I was 35, and now I'm so literally half my biological life. And what I've found is that what's happened in the last 2 years, it's mostly behind the scenes, is unlike anything I've seen in 35 years. But
so real progress. You're confident that we're making real progress on disclosure?
Oh yeah, but you're not going to see it on, a hearing like that. Not yet. Now, what we're trying to do is be sure that there's enough evidence that comes out asymmetrically from whistleblowers and evidence that it would force real hearings where the key players would be subpoenaed, and people who have been in these operations and in these underground facilities who we have on our team would be subpoenaed and be under oath. Now, we have them. If you go to our archive, you'll see we have 750 some whistleblowers.
And they're willing to talk. If they're subpoenaed, only if they get subpoenaed.
Some are willing to talk right now, and they still will not be allowed to at these hearings. But the ones who need a subpoena, they'll be subpoenaed. Same thing with law enforcement. And, if a federal agent comes up to you and asks you about something and you lie, that's a felony. So we have people at the very senior level of law enforcement that we've handed everything off to. And those guys are running fast and running hard. So no, this is enormous progress. Unbelievable progress is going on. So.
Well, I love to hear that. It feels that way as a layperson who doesn't have the connections you do, that things are happening, but I'm only seeing it through the lens of, I'm going to talk to you, it's awesome, or through Congress, because that stuff still seems significant to most people, but they're going to be blown away when they realize how far, how deep, how dark these programs go.
Well, some of the members of Congress have been read on by my team about that, and by me. About 4 years ago, senior folks with Senate Intelligence reached out to me, and I was in the SCIF, the Secure Compartment Information Facility, and provided and they said, "What do you have?" I said, "My network and disclosure project has everything." Remember, we've been gathering this sort of intelligence since the early 90s. So it's a very long process. Now, some of the whistleblowers have died, but we have their evidence and we have their testimony. Interestingly, if you go into our archive, you'll see there's something like 115 or 120 whistleblowers named with their credentials and the audio and video as well as transcripts. But it's sitting right there for everyone who's listening to see, but no one bothers to look. So, one of the big tasks I have is taking multiple terabytes of data and distilling it into, like, we just came out with the latest version of the presidential briefing document. For the first time, I published it. If you go to my site, drstephengreer.com, you will see that you can get a lightly redacted, some of it's redacted, briefing documents that's been provided to the White House and president, but also the Congress. And if you go into our archive, you'll see a lot of the vast amount of information that resulted in that. But that's only 340 or 50 pages. And when you get to an executive level, like, you know, when you're dealing with a cabinet level person or the president, you got to have it on one sheet of paper. So you have to take 20 terabytes of stuff and put it on one sheet. So that's what I've been doing this all the way back to President Clinton. But now things are happening so quickly that there's strong interest in many, many quarters. And also, I will say it's also nonpartisan, because everything we've done has always been nonpartisan. You know, and also I want to point out to Americans who are listening, the world's a big place, right? So we have outreach and are doing things with the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth countries, Canada, Australia, the European Union, elsewhere, and the Vatican, because ultimately when all this comes out, I've written a sample speech. You can find it in our archive for leaders in the world of how they speak about this without panicking the world into some ridiculous alien invasion week on the History Channel, you know, all that. So, you know, the thing is, if this is just an area of hobby, you know, it's a hobbyist thing or dilettantes, it's fun and it's sort of sci-fi and whatnot. When you start peeling it back and it's real, and it is, I wouldn't have given up my medical career to do this if it was some trivial thing. But then you're saying you have to begin to be responsible. What I'm not seeing yet is people treating this responsibly, because you're playing with fire. This information comes out the wrong way. It'd be much better if it was kept secret. So, and the people who are trying to steer it in the threat direction, in the false militaristic direction, those folks are playing with fire. And to the extent that they can deceive key members of Congress or people in the White House, now we're talking about going on a trajectory that would be catastrophic. So we're trying to steer this in a truthful direction with a good outcome, and not a War of the Worlds hysteria outcome. What we want is an era of peace, peaceful contact, enlightenment, high tech, bring the energy technologies out that would transform the planet in a generation, end all poverty and end all pollution. We have them. It's the ultimate peace dividend that should come out, but it has to come out wisely. For example, I have said all the way back to the Clinton era, we cannot let out the things that fly, right? I mean, an anti-gravity so-called or teleportation system can be repurposed in an instant by a rogue state or a terrorist into a missile delivery system. But something that would sit on our desk here, that would run your house, or in your car, that would run your car for energy from the 0 point or quantum vacuum, that should have been out 100 years ago. I'm sure you probably saw the documentary, The Lost Century, where we document 100 years of these lost technologies. But it has to be phased. And because if everything came out at once, unfortunately, the world is in such a state of decay, socially, spiritually, and geopolitically, that the most extraordinary technologies that I know of, those could be turned into a weapon system by all manner of sociopaths out there. Now, right now, some of the worst people on earth have those technologies and have been using them to traffic children, abduct people, make it look alien, mutilate people. And I just, that Peru case where faces were being ripped off.
The face peelers.
I know who was doing that. We know it was a human operation. It wasn't extraterrestrial. It was done using a very high-tech system to create terror and to give aliens a bad name. See, this is the kind of thing that you have to have a deep intelligence network to find out, what's behind this phenomenon. And, right? And that's what I try to do, is go down to the base, where is it really, where the rubber meets the road, but you can't do it by just getting a superficial report. What's behind that phenomenon? Well, you find out what part of it is a man-made psychological warfare operation. For example, we can't get it from him, but Dr. Jacques Vallée admitted in his 1992 book that he has a CIA document from 1985 describing the CIA engaged in alien abductions using these high-tech ships that look like a UFO in Brazil and Argentina for, and I'm quoting, it says, for its psychological warfare value. Exactly the same.
There it is.
There it is. But there's a document from the 50s that's from CIA by one of the directors, Smith, CIA Director Smith, who said, yeah, that we're going to use the UFO subject for its, quote, psychological warfare value. So it's like, this is where people in the GaiaSphere and people in your network need to wake up to how easily it is to manipulate and create war. The people who benefit and profit, not only financially, but in controlling the masses through war and conflict, they cannot get away with it on something this big, right? They've gotten away with it on other geopolitical problems, like the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, Vietnam, elsewhere, but we cannot let this happen on this issue, or it's really bad news for humanity. So that's, there's a right way and a truthful way for this to be disclosed. But I would say that the center of all the money and zeitgeist in disclosure world, the irony is I founded the whole global disclosure movement, and 90% of it's been hijacked into this threat narrative by people who have been paid to do that or told to do it. So this is where we have to be very careful. And I think that we're at the point now, an inflection point where this is all going to happen the next year or two, almost certainly.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, maybe sooner. I know what's going. Yeah, and so it's moving very quickly at some very deep and also high levels. So,
can you share any more details? Or you can't say anything yet?
Oh, yeah. But, I have a whole weekend to share it with people in the GaiaSphere. So it would take much longer than we have here. But
fair enough.
But I'll just say that, the people, there are multiple categories of whistleblowers. Some are willing to come forward. Some want a subpoena to give them cover. And others want to stay in the shadows, but are operating behind the scene to network and get things to happen for, let's call it the white hats. Or as they call themselves, the first time they contacted me a few years ago, they said, we're the have-nots. And we're talking about the top JSOC, special forces, Pentagon, and other people in government. And they said, we call ourselves the have-nots because we know there's a deep black operation going on that even those of us with top secret clearance and read into black projects that are legal by the way, a legal black project, the president and the Gang of Eight, the oversight chairs in the House and the Senate know about. An illegal black project is one that is completely off book and is being run illegally and unconstitutionally. The entire UAP UFO subject since the late 50s, the late Eisenhower era, has been run as an illegal black project.
Dr. Greer, why are we shooting at UFOs? There was a video released in the UAP hearing that showed a Hellfire missile hit some sort of anomalous object. Honestly, it really bothered me. I think a lot of the public was flabbergasted. They couldn't believe that we would shoot at something potentially millions of years more advanced than us. Why are we shooting at UFOs?
Yeah, I had seen that before it was released, that video. And by the way, that object that was zipping through a theater of operations near Yemen about a year ago, in October 2024, that object almost certainly was not NHI, non-human ET. It was one of ours. But remember, the people running covert programs using human high-tech based on anti-gravity or reverse engineered ET tech, those guys are their own entity. They're their own universe. And the guys who are operating the drone, Hellfire missile that fired at that, don't know anything about it. This is like when you had think about this. You had the Tic Tac, right? That whole famous case was on CNN and everywhere. As soon as it came out, of course, I knew it was a Lockheed Martin Skunk Works device, man-made. And I alerted people that's what it was. And we have people who know for a fact in the system on our team. But of course, David Fravor, who was a pilot, the F-18 pilot, he told me, it has to be alien. We don't have anything like that. I said, you're read in on even top secret operations that are in the conventional legal world. This is the exotic illegal world, and you would have no foundation. If the president isn't read in on this, why would a jet pilot? Right?
Right.
So
Right.
this gets into the conundrum. So, but it's dangerous. And here's why it's dangerous. Because you have perfectly honest, good men and women in the mainline military, Pentagon, or even CIA who know nothing about this issue. And so a tech like this shows up. Well, how are you going to react? Is it an enemy object? Did it come out of Iran? Did it get? So they're going to fire on it. But this lack of information has also resulted in some disastrous situations where we have fired on peaceful ET craft. Now, there's another whole level of operations where we are deliberately targeting ET vehicles with advanced energy weapons, mainly scalar and electromagnetic pulse weapons that'll knock them out, because these ET craft are 100% electronic. There's no fuel payload. You hit them with a directional EMP weapon, it freezes all their systems and they drop like a rock right out to the ground or into the ocean. And I've known about those operations for many decades. And that's a very dangerous game being played. This is why in 1990, my core program, and people should get the app, CE5 Contact. Now, a lot of what we're going to be doing in the GaiaSphere is I'm going to be unpacking why CE5 Contact, or Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where people make contact with these civilizations, understanding the Vedas and Sanskrit. We'll get to this with the Bugasphere in a minute, and how communication happens through both a machine and consciousness, the interface between mind and machine. That's what I discovered when I had my onboard ET craft contact experience in 1973 when I was 18. And that's when I created this whole contact protocol, CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And, in preparation, people could see the documentary called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. It's had hundreds of millions of people see it. And I think it'd be good for people who are coming to see that before the event. And also get the app. The CE5 Contact app is a whole training program in meditation, remote viewing, setting up those systems to be able to make contact, et cetera, and so on. But, and I'll
those
talk
are great.
About,
those are amazing resources. Question for clarity though, because one thing in the space people talk about a lot is the craft conscious, or when you connect to a craft, or you're on a craft, people and whistleblowers talk about feeling like the craft is alive.
It is.
Are you saying more? It is. Okay. Are you saying it's a merging between the biological entity and the craft itself, or they're separate? They're both their own conscious beings of some sort.
Well, it's like the father of quantum mechanics said, the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. That is the singularity, not what AI people talk about. And so what you're talking about here are technologies that are so advanced that, let's say, the commander or the person, piloting the ET craft, the consciousness of that person, even if an extraterrestrial person, is embedded within all the systems of that craft. And so the craft itself is conscious, but by an extension and interface with the awareness of the pilot or the commander or whoever. And so the really other part of this is that those craft also have a biological component. So even at Roswell, the one that didn't get blown to smithereens, some of the skin on the craft, a witness who was there before he died, I met with in 1995 at the first gathering of whistleblowers I organized back then, and 30 years ago. And he said, the skin on it was like if you took a time lapse. Let's say you got cut and you did a time lapse of your skin healing. It was doing that in front of their eyes, right?
Wow.
So the technology, it's called a bio-nano technology, where there's a biological, technological interface, but at a nanomolecular level, but deeper than that, even at a consciousness level. So we're talking, this ain't your granddad's Oldsmobile, right? Or a Boeing, or a Boeing Dreamliner. And that's the other thing. And, in terms of making contact, there's a very clear distinction between a man-made UFO and how it can respond versus an interstellar one. And I'm going to go through this in the GaiaSphere in November so that people understand when they have an encounter or a sighting, how do you distinguish between, it's like, is it fake, meaning a man-made one, or an actual one? Most people don't know what that criteria is, and there is a criteria, but a lot of it has to do with the interactivity of that craft with your own thought and consciousness. Like you can think to it, if it's ET, and say, please move to the right, and it'll move to the right.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and that's called a CE5, Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind. So we do this as a formal program, and yeah, I mean, if you guys had an outdoor amphitheater, I'd take people out at night, or it'd be too cold in November. But
no, we're just about it. We can't pull it off. Believe me, we want to do it, but it's just too hard to pull off with everything.
I know. Oh, we do it all the time. Well, it's hard to find the right place, but we just had 300 people out in the desert in Arizona doing it. And
oh, wow.
By the way, you're going to see some footage. We had over 3 separate nights, between 250 and 300 spheres and orbs that appeared, that materialized in clear air and disappeared. It's amazing what happened.
Oh,
it's phenomenal.
I can't wait till you release that. That's incredible.
Yeah. We'll show it to folks at the GaiaSphere, because we have 5 high resolution cameras on a platform getting 360 images, but it's a huge amount of data. And our team is all volunteer. We don't have the kind of wealth that Gaia has. So we have to just have volunteers go through that footage. But someday I hope we can get an AI program that can scan, all these terabytes of data from these videos from very high and pick up the anomalous material. But right now it's being done by hand, which is laborious. But we're going to put some of that together and show folks. And I witnessed all 3 of those night events, and 2 of them were very late. They were 3, 4 in the morning, when most, I always stay up till 4 or 5, because that's when everything great happens, between 2 and 5 a.m.
Yeah.
But oh yeah. Well, an emergency doctor, we're used to being up all night, so.
That's true. It's just in your blood. Well, that's incredible. I can't wait to see that. I can't wait to reveal it. I can't wait for you to show it at GaiaSphere. That's like what I live for in these moments, Dr. Greer. But I want to move on to something different, something that's one of the hottest topics going on right now in disclosure. And I know you're intimately involved. You and I were both down in Mexico City. You were down there shooting a documentary and investigating the Buga Sphere. You just released kind of jaw-dropping information about the Bugasphere. I don't know how excited I should be. Basically, I'm going to summarize, and please take it from there and give the audience the details they need to know.
Sure.
Somehow you were able to, the University of Georgia was able to carbon date resin from the Bugasphere, and it was dated at 12,560 years old. Like, how excited should I be? Where is the threshold for when we can say an object is created by non-human intelligence?
Well, I think on the Bugasphere, we're pretty much there. There are a number of data points.
Really?
One is when we were there, I was with some scientists taking around the equator of the Bugasphere. There are those little holes, 31 tiny, 4 millimeter tiny. Well, what I realized, and that no one had thought about this, is that I looked at the material in there. I said, you can't carbon date metal, but you can carbon date organic material. Like even if it was a resin, petroleum based, or some, like whatnot, because there's carbon atoms in it. And, so I said, well, what if we could get that material out? Because there was one of those holes where they had already damaged the resin. I said, let's carefully pull it out and get it carbon dated. And then at the same time, take some metal shavings from once the resin was out. It's kind of like a surgical procedure. And we had some very fine instruments and got the metal shavings. They had to get at least a gram of it. So we could then do metallurgical tests, one of which we don't have these back yet. Those are pending. I think by the time I'm with you guys in November, we'll have these results, which could be quite interesting.
Oh, that is so fascinating.
And what those will tell us, we hope, one of the tests we're doing is a gamma ray emission test from the metal, which could possibly tell us whether the metal originated from the Earth's crust or outer space. And though that would be very interesting, But we're also going to try to put together what the alloy is. We know there's aluminum and some others, but we're doing a very high tech, very expensive. This is costing us like $50,000. Thank you for your tuition, folks. This is where it's going. I don't get the money, and I don't need the money, be blunt about it. So basically, those tests may be a further elaboration. But the fact that that resin material was 12,500 years old would indicate, unless it was something that was put in those holes that was older than the manufacturer of the sphere. See, so this is where you get into the fine nuance. I'm a scientist, so I get into the nuance of it. But assuming that that resin, which looked very old, was the same age as the sphere itself, we're talking, 1,200, 500 years ago in that part of South America, some high-tech electrogravitic things flying around. And it's an anti-gravity free energy device because there's no fuel payload and there's no nuclear radioactivity. There's electromagnetic fields and radiation coming from it, but none of the ionizing radiation that you get from energy from a small nuclear reactor, because that would be a Geiger counter, go off the scale. So we know it's not nuclear. We know it's not oil, gas, coal, jet, and it was flying around and spinning. So it's an extraordinary development. And now that you say, well, it's 12,500 years old, perhaps it's older. The metal, the sphere itself, perhaps that resin was replaced. So maybe it dates back even older. But you cannot, unfortunately, unless you got on the inside and saw if there was other material that was like the resin that had carbon in it. The best dating we're going to get right now, without getting all the way into the center of the sphere. And I've seen the CAT scans of the interior, and I have a plan of how to get in there without damaging the sphere or cracking it open. But I won't bore you.
Yeah, that's everyone's big criticism. Like, why don't you just break it open and tell the world?
No, because no, that's stupid. No offense, whoever said that is idiotic. You don't take something and damage it, because even though it isn't flying now, because it hit that high voltage line and probably shorted out a lot of its circuitry. If you were to do that, you could irreparably damage what part of it is still functioning. So, you want to be careful with this. You want to do it as non-invasively, to use a medical term, as possible. So one of the things I've suggested is that there are two of those little holes around the equator that communicate all the way through the thickness of the metal, where if you took the resin out, you could go all the way through, make the hole a little bigger, and get a fiber optic scope in there, like you use for medicine or robotic surgery in medicine, and have a camera externally to put it on a big screen. And we might see some structures in there that then subsequently we could get more data on, or even get another carbon-14 test from inside the sphere, as opposed to these little tiny holes on the outside. So, I think there's a lot more to be done. Jaime Maussan has that object, not me, but I'm advising him on what their team could do. The next step of tests that I think they ought to be doing scientifically.
But you're already there. You're saying you're already at a point where you think it's most likely non-human intelligence created. Or do you need more data at this point? No, you're saying we're already kind of there. More data.
Well, it's either non-human created, or it was a very advanced human-based civilization that had contact with ETs. Now, remember,
a long time ago. Okay.
Yeah. So let me tell your listeners a little interesting debriefing I had near Huntsville, Alabama, where the Marshall Space Flight Center is, and the Redstone Arsenal. There's a guy, a scientist there I know, about maybe 10, 15 years ago. I was down there in his skiff, a secure compartment information facility. It's, a secure electronically sealed facility. And this guy worked for the CIA, but via a contractor. And periodically things would be brought to him, ancient, like a piece of technology, but that was hundreds of thousands of years old. And he says some of them were from Earth-based civilizations that we have virtually no record of, and some were extraterrestrial civilizations. So now you get into, with the Bugasphere, It's old. It's definitely not of a modern make and era. The symbols on it, we've just found out, are a type of proto-Sanskrit. You may have heard this or not. This is a big breaking story in the last few days.
No, I haven't.
Oh
That's
boy.
incredible.
Well, this is why everyone stop and listen. At the GaiaSphere, I'm going to go a deep dive into Sanskrit, the Vedas, the science of consciousness, and that interface with interstellar technologies and contact. There is an interface there, and I know it. I've known it since I was 18. And we're going to talk about it. The Bugasphere seems to have two different linguistic specialists in the past week in Europe have found that those symbols are from a proto-Sanskrit, an earlier than modern day Sanskrit language, but related to Sanskrit. And I think it's very likely that the science of consciousness in Vedas and Sanskrit and proto-Sanskrit came from another star system. I've always felt that was the case. It's why I became a meditation teacher after I had my onboard and became, I learned the Vedas.
Very familiar. Yeah.
And learned Sanskrit. And I still teach people Sanskrit mantras and chanting and all that. But I think that there is a nexus where this very high tech aspect of it comes together with ancient Sanskrit and ancient science of consciousness, because the Vedas are the best repository of that knowledge that we have. And, it precedes Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism. A lot of people think that the Vedas are, same as Hinduism and Buddha. I said, no, those were way later, way, way, way later. So Sanskrit and the Vedas are a body of knowledge that predate any organized religion on the planet. Another fact, and I'm going to do a Sanskrit puja and meditation for everyone at the GaiaSphere. And then I'm going to connect these dots that we're learning about the Buga Sphere at the GaiaSphere. Oh, that's fun. Anyway, but I will go through this for people. It'll be a lot. I'm afraid it'll be a lot for folks to take in 2 days, but we're also going to have a little fundraiser for disclosure that Friday night in Boulder. People can come. You can find out about it at drstevengreer.com, because here's one of the things we're having to fund. We're funding all this research, but all these whistleblowers that come to Washington, we pay for their airfare, hotel, security, everything. So there's no one picking up that tab. Congress doesn't pay for it. We pay for it. So,
I mean, Dr. Greer, just personally, thank you for everything you've done over the years. I've been following you since 2001. I don't think I caught the press conference live, but after that, you changed my whole perspective on the whole threat-based narrative of ETs and abduction and all that. So I appreciate the work you're doing.
I personally interviewed the gentleman who picked it up after it landed, and the subsequent engineer that had it for about 30 days there in college.
Jose and David, I think are their names.
Jose and David. And I spent a fair amount of time with them. And what's interesting is that, when they first picked it up, it weighed about 2 kilograms. Now it's 10 kilograms.
Right.
And I was talking to the scientists that work with Jaime Maussan, and they couldn't make it. I said, no, this is the essence of what's called mass cancellation. So electrogravitic and ET propulsion systems, both the man-made ones, when something is moving in this electromagnetic anti-gravity bubble, the mass of the object itself, like here's this crystal, if it weighs however many ounces, it can be lighter than a feather, because the actual, let's call it the atomic weight, the real mass of the object is getting in Earth gravity reduced almost to zero, because of the electromagnetic and anti-gravitational field or gravitic field. And I'm not going to get into the physics of it. We understand the physics of it. But when I heard that about the Bugasphere, I said, now we have something very significant, because it meant that it wasn't just having a spinning effect. It actually was becoming more and more massless. Just so you know, mass is what something weighs even out in space. Weight is what it weighs in one gravitational force of the Earth. I know it's a physics thing, but so go kill me. I'm a scientist. So anyway, but that's important to realize. So when this thing went from 2 kilograms, and when I held it and picked it up, it was 10, very heavy. That's 22 pounds, right? Over 22 pounds. Now we're finding that this is the case with similar objects, and people they're mystified by it, but it's because they're not understanding how that technology, the electromagnetic field and anti-gravity technology, literally reduces the mass of something. Now, if it becomes totally massless, it disappears in thin air. That's why they disappear. So if you take that on a spectrum, it can be reduced, and it gets to zero. It vanishes in thin air in front of you. And that,
where's it go?
It goes well, we would say it goes transdimensional at that point. It can be, and we're going to get into this. It goes into an area that's between three-dimensional space-time and other dimensions. So, for example, let's make it very human. You have your body of light, like you have a lucid flying dream or an out-of-body experience. That's a real thing. Now, what is that? There's a science to that, and it's called the astral body. So an ET vehicle can be shifted to where it goes out of 3D into a dimension that is finer, that is closely approximates what we would call the astral, or the body of light, that subtle energy. And it's not going to be visible with the naked eye usually, but sometimes even in that state, it'll be in this dimension a little bit, where you'll just see almost like a light or an
like
orb.
it can peer through and kind of track where it is to see the 3D reality. Okay.
Yes. Or all you see with the naked eye might be a sphere or an orb. You know, like in that ET that came in our circle up in Arizona. No, the healer, and the man had lost his hearing.
Oh, right. I mean,
well, all you saw with the naked eye was a teardrop-shaped red orb, like a teardrop. But with the camera, luckily, there was an instant where eyes didn't pick it up, where the ET fully materialized standing beside this man. And we have that picture. I'm going to show it the GaiaSphere and go through how that happened. But imagine an entire spacecraft can do that, right? So you may see something that's an orb. If it were to come into full 3D, it could be a 300-foot diameter spacecraft. So this gets into everyone wanting to do CE5 contact needs to understand this and the science behind it, although it gets a bit esoteric, I guess. But I try.
Our audience can take it. They can take it. Our audience and our audience can take it.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what I want to do is unpack that for people, because it becomes important when you're out doing CE5 under the stars. You know, not only to be able to distinguish between a man-made and a non-man-made object, but also if it's an ET object, all the different thousands of ways it can appear, and you're just picking up on the ephemeral, you know, the sort of the superficial part of it. Behind it, if you understand the science of this, you're going to realize there's more there than meets our physical eyes. But this then becomes something where very accurate remote viewing capability and consciousness becomes valuable, because then you just see an indicator in this dimension, but on channel 1, which is your conscious mind, you can see the whole thing. So that's what we do.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I can't wait for you to break that down further on the 8th and 9th coming up, folks. Okay, I have a question. I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned that the Jersey drone wave was a psychological operation. Right now, I'm sure you're aware, in Denmark and across large parts of Europe, very similar things are happening. Airports are being shut down, high strangeness, just like was reported in Jersey. Is this the same thing? Is this a psychological operation?
Yeah, it's probably related to it, but it may have some. Excuse me.
Okay.
I think it may have something to do with the Ukraine-Russian war. So there could be some operations trying to sort of mix up the picture over there, but it could be the same sort of operations. So remember, the organization keeping all this secret works globally. You know, I have some special forces guys that have confirmed that these man-made UFOs, triangular ones, have been found operating in Russia. There was one that was downed in northern Iran that had to be blown up. I mean, I can't, you know, I can give you the information. I can't tell you who, you know, there are these kind of people on my team, right? But so this is a global. I know Americans are very narcissistic and look at it, you know, the whole world is just the 4.5% of the population on Earth. No, it's a big world out there, and it's a bigger universe. So the Disclosure
Sure.
Project has to think globally and universally. So when we gather this sort of information, begin to realize, well, whatever kind of nonsense and deceptive operations have been happening here, there's no reason why they wouldn't be happening in Russia, Europe, China, other places, South America. You know, like the person who went down there with one of these high techs and ripped off faces, making it look like scary aliens were doing this. So we know how that's done and why they're doing it. And this new drone event, now some of that could well be some operations that are testing European and American response to incursions like that. But I think that may have also been related to the New Jersey, because it isn't just UAP related. It's a geopolitical aspect of this that involves this covert group that can do all manner of things behind the scenes to manipulate governments and world leaders and whatnot who are not read in. See, this is the danger of this level of secrecy. If you have people in national military command authorities here and abroad, and I'm working with senior people in the United Kingdom, it's the same problem. I'm going to Canada tomorrow. It's the same problem in Canada. And that is, when that happens, what you realize is that those leaders are playing with only, if 52 cards in a deck, they're only playing with 2 cards or 4 cards. And this covert group has all 52. And so it leaves them at an enormous strategic disadvantage. And this is why I said earlier, knowledge is power. And we're trying to get this level of information and knowledge to the right people, because ultimately, whether you're David Fravor flying an F-18 Hornet chasing the Tic Tac or other things, you need to know the whole landscape of what's going on here. Otherwise, you're going to be making some very bad and dangerous decisions, because you're going to be manipulated by not having enough knowledge. People have got to understand this. I think we're at childhood's end here, where regardless, again, we're nonpartisan. Whoever's at the right, I'm looking at the White House and the Washington Monument right here and the Capitol, whoever's in those buildings, and the same thing at 10 Downing Street or in Canada, they've got to understand this, because in not knowing a granular, detailed level of this leaves you vulnerable to being tricked and making terrible decisions. And that is how you end up in a war, or how you end up in a catastrophe that would greatly benefit people who like to divide people and keep endless war going. Our job is to try to bring in an era of what I call universal peace, where we transition from the current state to not only a stable world that's peaceful, but an interplanetary situation that's peaceful. Now, what these guys eventually want to do is trade the geopolitical wars, make a peaceful world united in an interplanetary conflict. That's been their 70-year plan. And that's 99% of ufology. Unwittingly, usually, are putting out disinformation and false cases they think are real, that convince people of the alien threat that Werner von Braun warned us about. So
Right.
I know this kind of people's brains begin to ache at this point, but you got to understand, the whole psychological warfare nexus around this that evolved from the 40s and 50s onward. And I have to say, they're very, very good at what they do, which is quite evil. They're good at being evil, but we have to be good at I always say, they own this darkness. We got to own the light. We got to own the truth. We got to own and also we need to articulate, and this is the punchline, we have to articulate a path forward where all this comes out, the safe technologies to disclose are put into action very quickly, and we create a world where we actually are making peaceful, open contact with these other civilizations, because they want that if we would do it in a way that wasn't based on a military response. And think about this. Let's step into the shoes of a being from another star system. And in 100 years, they've seen our environment collapse, thermonuclear weapons proliferate, all the wars that we've had in the last 100 years, their own technologies, ET technologies, being reverse engineered and then deployed against them to shoot them
Right.
down, and those same technologies being used to stage and hoax events portraying the ETs as these monsters from outer space, like a Hollywood movie. So they're watching this, and where do we end up? Well, it's like that old Chinese proverb: unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're headed. So we got to change course, and we got to do it quickly. So we need a course correction. Then the universe and all these civilizations out there will open their arms to us, but we have to approach them in an enlightened, peaceful way, not down the barrel of a directional energy weapon. And right now, except for the CE5 community, going and saying, we're here to make peaceful contact. That's why I'm calling this whole program at Gaia Ambassadors to the Universe. We want to create millions of ambassadors who are knowledgeable and aren't going to be tricked by the deceptions, who can make contact with these civilizations. Because here's something else that might happen. Depending on how this all plays out, who knows? If things go sideways, there will be a massive ET assistance, right? That assistance is going to need points of contact. Guess who that's going to be? You and me and the people in the GaiaSphere. Think about it. That's been my plan for 35 years. We're backstopping, okay, because the governments may be completely, the buffoonery I see in government, I don't care, left, right, center, and the cluelessness, there's a clock ticking. And so at some point, that clock, we run the clock out. And we're going to need people who are enlightened, peaceful, who actually know how to discern a staged fake ET thing from a real one, but who will be the points of contact to those civilizations. Who else is going to do it? Your police chief, your mayor, your governor? They don't know anything about this subject.
Right.
So this is why a whole, large group of people who understand the science of consciousness, contact, CE5 contact, that's really important. It's strategically very important. And I think it's important for the future of humanity and the earth.
I love that. So I think we're kind of at the end here, but
Okay.
I want to follow up with one quick question. So what does that look like? So if the ETs have to take over disclosure, what does that look like? Is that open contact with select groups? Is that appearing over major cities? How would they go about that specifically?
No, the protocol is, I know what the protocol is, only in a worst case scenario. In other words, if we go to a full geophysical catastrophe or a major thermonuclear launch situation, what have you, then and only then. But the only other situation where there would be that level of it happening overtly, because they want us to learn, they want us to evolve, not be conquered. They're way wiser than we are. Like, we go into Afghanistan thinking we're going to turn it into a Jeffersonian democracy, and 20 years later and trillions of dollars later, it's right back to having a theocracy of the Taliban, right? So they know that external forcing something from one outside culture to another doesn't work. So they're only going to have to intervene in a worst case, but I mean go read my paper I wrote in 1991 called The Comprehensive Assessment of the UFO ETI, Extraterrestrial Intelligence Subject. That went all through the aerospace industries and CIA, unbeknownst to me, in the early days of the internet. And it's a very accurate assessment. And of course, it's in my first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications, but which was done in the 90s. But I think what people want to realize is that they don't want to do that unless they have to. The other problem, and this is a problem that's evolved since I got on the stage doing this, is the technology curve covertly, let's say 40s, 50s, it was like going up a little bit. Then they hit mid 50s. It went and now it's vertical, nonlinear. So the reverse engineering technologies that are in these covert programs, when Ben Rich, the week he died, he told a friend of mine, James Goodall, the aerospace historian, that anything you can imagine, what you've seen on Star Trek, Star Wars, we've already done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. It's not at Area 51. It's out at the Lockheed underground facilities. I know where they are. I've been flown right over them in a classified helicopter. I'll tell everyone, I'll show you the pictures of it. You want to see the pictures of it?
Yes.
I'll put a pin
Yes,
on a
please.
map and show you where it is. That's what I'm handing over to law enforcement into the White House. So then I almost got killed, 3 weeks later, as you know. But
Right, yeah, I remember that.
severely injured. But so what? If I die, I die. I'm fatalistic about it. But the fact is, I don't have any fear about it. Make my day and kill me. I died when I was 17. I'm not afraid of death. So beautiful on the other side. But yeah, that's a spirit warrior, not afraid of death. But anyway, so I tell people, look, we now have technologies that are reaching parity with ET systems, but we're using the worst people in the world have them, and they're using them aggressively against the ETs. So there is a universal right to self-defense. And this 2 years ago at the National Press Club, that's when I said there's a red line out there in the cosmos, and we're pushing through that red line. And it's very dangerous. And this is why it's going to take a stand down order by the president and Congress, as well as a strike team that goes and stand down those systems. So I will talk very openly at the GaiaSphere about what that looks like without giving any particulars, because I'm advising those people. I'm advising the people who would have to be in position to stand down those illegally run systems that are a threat to the earth and humanity, and is a very serious program that we're doing. So, you'll get a little peek behind that curtain, but I can't do a lot of tactical or other information. I have to choose my words very carefully because of what I'm doing, to be honest with you.
Fair.
The irony of my life right now? I founded the Disclosure Project, and yet I'm holding the biggest secrets in the history of the UFOs subjects. And I can't disclose them, or it would blow up the whole strategy. So it's a weird conundrum I'm in, right?
Wow. Well, I think I'm going to stop you right there, Dr. Greer. That was incredible. I was already excited for the event, and I just know that if that didn't get you excited, I don't know what will, people. That was amazing. So again,
it'll be fun.
It's going to be awesome. I went to the last one, and it was incredible. So November 8th and 9th is the GaiaSphere event. It's called UAP Disclosure and CE5 ET Contact with Dr. Stephen Greer. Today's the last day. You can get the early bird special. Please check out the link in the description below. Dr. Greer, it's always a pleasure. I could talk to you all day, but I know your time is precious. So I'll see you in a couple months.
Great. Good seeing you again. Thank you.